Hello everyone, welcome. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in this world. I hope you're all doing okay. Thank you for being here. My name is Michael, my pronouns are he, they. I'm the founder of We Create Space. A brief visual description for anyone that needs it. I'm a white male presenting with brown coiffed hair. Got a bit more stubble than usual today. Black t-shirt, got bed behind me with lots of cushions and it's a plant and photo frame and some lamps as well. So, who are We Create Space? So if you aren't familiar with us, we are a global collective of LGBTQ plus change makers, empowering our communities and allies with tools, knowledge and a support network for self-care, personal growth and queer leadership and queer allyship. And as a non-profit social enterprise, we're really on a mission to drive positive change for LGBTQ plus people across global industries, cultures and societies. And we do this through connecting our communities and allies with tools, knowledge, and a support network. So, and through these shared experiences, through workshops, through content creation and consultancy. And we're also hosting our first annual Pride event this year. We just hosted a summit last week, and we're also hosting a retreat taking place the 4th to the 6th of July, really kind of putting mental health and well-being at the forefront. As we know from personal experience that navigating Pride season really does come with its challenges if you're a community leader. And this event is an opportunity for queer leaders to come together, to reset, re-energize, and reconnect. So we'll be offering a schedule of workshops, discussions, classes. Registration's open, so do get in touch if you're interested. So before we start today, we just wanted to really ground ourselves in this space. We're going to be kind of discussing some quite challenging topics. So we thought we would just start with a little breathing exercise and body scan. So don't worry if you've never done any kind of meditation before. It's only going to be a few minutes. And I just want you to start by just closing your eyes if you feel comfortable, or you can just focus your gaze somewhere in the room, or you can look downwards and just settle into your chair. And just start with taking just a few long, deep breaths. So just start with a slow, deep belly breath. So breathing in and really filling your belly and holding for a moment. And then gently releasing that breath. And just repeat that pattern a few times. So in through the nose, into the belly, slowly and deeply, holding for a moment, and then gently releasing that breath. One more. And now just relax your breathing, just so it's natural. And just as you inhale and release your next exhale, I want you to soften anything that can be softened. So that might be in your body, it might be rigidity, or it might be tension that needs softening. It might be in your forehead, it might be the jaw, shoulders, your belly. Maybe it's thoughts that need softening. Maybe it's emotions. Just soften whatever needs to soften, whether it's in your body or in your mind. And with each inhale, just feel as the breath enters your lungs. And with each exhale, just allow for that softening. It's like your body is just taking a deep sigh and relaxing with each exhale. So breathe in and breathe out and soften. Breathe in. Breathe out and soften. And I just want you to come back to that if at any point throughout this conversation you perhaps are feeling a bit anxious. Just come back to your breath and ground yourself. So now you can come back to the room, gently open your eyes. Today's session is part of our Queer Perspectives series, and today we're going to be discussing mental health and specifically kind of overcoming addiction, and each of our wonderful speakers are going to be sharing parts of their own personal experiences, stories, perspectives, and hopefully not only going to gain some insight but also some practical advice as well around creating change with your own organisations and communities. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Erica, our wonderful host for today's session.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thank you for bringing us through that lovely guided meditation and reminding us to slow down and to breathe. Welcome, everyone. It might be morning or afternoon or evening for you. I know we come from around the world. My name is Erica Burton. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as queer, and I'm currently located in Toronto, Canada. I do want to acknowledge that Toronto, where I am speaking from, has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, it is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island or Canada, and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to both live and work on this land. I am a registered nurse, and I wear a few different hats. I work for an international organization that focuses on global health and nursing policy. And I also work here in Toronto as a registered nurse at Casey House, which is Canada's first and only HIV/AIDS hospital. And so I wanted to welcome our speakers today. We have a fantastic panel, and I'd love to hear your name, your pronouns, how you identify within the LGBTQ plus community, also where you're located and what you currently do for work or other things. So first I'll hand it over to Maylis.
Thanks, Erica. Hello, everyone. My name's, I love Suresh is smiling because he didn't want to go first. But anyway, my name's Maylis. I use she and her pronouns. I identify as a bisexual woman. I am currently located in Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa. I use she, her pronouns. I am a program director at We Create Space. I'm a coach, I'm a consultant. And interestingly, find myself here after building this panel and brought myself to the panel. So I'm quite excited to engage in this conversation, which is quite dear to my heart. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maylis. Thanks for leading the way. And then following the rules, I will hand it over now to Anick to introduce himself.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Maylis. My name is Anick. I use he, him pronouns. I am bisexual. I am also intersex, and intersex is when you're born with variations of sex development that don't fit what we typically describe as male or female, but I identify as a man, and I was raised in quite a neutral way, but also raised as a male predominantly. I'm located in London, and I currently am a researcher in childhood and children's rights, and I am training to be a social worker. But aside from that, I'm a creative consultant.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Anick. And last but not least, Suresh.
All right, thank you so much, Erica, Maylis, and Anick. Super excited to be here. I'm Suresh Ramdas. I go with the pronouns he, him, his, and I identify myself to be a gay person, located in India, to be specific, in Bangalore. I currently work in a multinational company as manager for learning and talent development. That's my day job. But I do have a gay job where I do a lot of work in spreading awareness about the LGBTQ plus community in corporates, schools, colleges, and slowly and steadily, I am talking about mental health in some of the conversations that we're going to be having today, slowly and steadily in India as well. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So I wanted just to start off the conversation by giving two disclaimers. The first one being that in today's conversation, we will be talking about subjects that might be triggering for some folks. We'll touch on issues like mental disorders, abuse, sex, addiction, substance use and substance abuse, self-harm, and suicide. So please, if at any point you feel like you need to mute the conversation for a few minutes, or you need to leave the conversation, please do that for self-care. Be gentle with yourselves. We'll also pop into the chat a link with some resources that you can access as well. The other thing is that this conversation is going to be explored through a UK, an Indian, and a West African perspective, directly related to the panelists' experiences. So wherever you are joining from, we just acknowledge that this conversation is global and fluid. So the first part of the session will be a panelist discussion with Suresh and Maylis and Anick. And as you're listening, we would like you to think of questions or comments, and if you do, pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom, because after the discussion, we will move to about 10 or so minutes for questions from you and comments. The next thing I wanted to mention was just to sort of start off the discussion with some language framing, and to put the topics that we're talking about into context a little bit. So a popular definition of mental health is a state of well-being in which the person realizes his or her or their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, fruitfully, and is able to contribute to their community. I think it's important to understand that mental health and mental health problems are not opposing conditions. So someone diagnosed with a mental illness can experience good mental health, while someone that doesn't have an official diagnosis of mental illness can also experience poor mental health or disrupted mental health. And these can occur at different times and change throughout someone's life. Because the scope of mental health is so big, I want to use the language sort of disrupted mental health to refer to mental illness or to poor mental health, which we will all experience at different degrees and at least once in our lifetimes. So this just suggests that the two concepts don't conflict, and that just because you don't have a diagnosis or because you do have a diagnosis, it doesn't define your experiences. And then a quick note on addictions. An addiction is a treatable and a chronic medical disease technically, but it's a very complex interaction with different brain circuits, with genetics, with your environment, with your life experiences. And so when we talk about addictions, just know that we're talking about behaviors that may be compulsive or harmful or interfere with sort of activities of daily living. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then as we develop this conversation, we will learn also what mental health means for our panelists and for maybe some of you in the conversation. So on that note, I will turn over to our panelists. And Anick, I will start with you. And my first question to you is really actually to follow along from what I just was speaking about in terms of what mental health means for you. So what has been your journey, if you're open to sharing that with us? What's been your journey in terms of your mental health, and then how did shame and stigma play a part in that experience? So you're welcome to provide examples related to maybe experiences in the workplace, and then any strategies that come up that you have found are helpful or maybe not helpful. Over to you, Anick.
Great, thanks, Erica. So it's a big question, and I think one of the things that was just going through my head as you were saying it, because one of my coping mechanisms is to try and make the conversation really funny or try and avoid answering questions. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be funny if I came on this panel and suddenly didn't want to talk about my mental health? But I will. So I guess my mental health journey is very complicated, and I stopped referring to it as a mental illness for myself and for my own well-being. And I no longer say that I suffer from depression. I say I live with depression. So I have chronic depression, anxiety, and I've dealt with eating disorders and things in the past as well. And the reason I say I live with those things instead of suffering from them is because they are very much enshrined in my daily life and everything I do. They are something that needs managing on a day-to-day basis, which means that sometimes days are better, sometimes hours are better than other hours. And when I think about my specific mental health journey, I feel like I have lived with depression for a lot longer than most people tend to. And I feel like that's because I also grew up in a household which had disabled parents and people who were living with depression but didn't want to discuss it. So there was an element of it which was learned as well. I mentioned earlier that I'm intersex, and that has played a huge part in actually how I see the world and how I see my life. So for those of you who are unaware of my story, when I was born, they couldn't tell if I was a boy or a girl, and I was born 3 months early. So it was a very stressful time for my parents. It was a very traumatic birth experience. And so I came out of all of that chaos, and I basically spent a lot of my life having surgeries to fit in. So for those of you who are unaware of intersex lives, when you are intersex, there is often an over-medicalized experience to your life where doctors will assign you with a particular sex, or they'll look at what you look like. So they observed that I had more male characteristics and that my chromosomes were XY. And so they decided that they would make me more in line with a male body. And so I always grew up with this idea that I wasn't enough. And that is what fuels my depression, I think. I've done a lot of work over the years, a lot of introspection. And part of my strange addictions and addictions I've had to deal with is this addiction to self-improvement, as I used to refer to it. And this idea that I'm constantly trying to be someone else. So I was addicted to just essentially never being who I am. And that took the form of agreeing to whatever surgeries or treatments that were offered to me. It also took the form of having lots and lots of different kinds of experiences with mental health professionals where I would actually just ignore the work that they were giving me and just spend the time thinking about things from a very conceptual perspective, but not actually doing the work. And things changed for me very intensely when I decided to come out and share my story, and when I decided to actually start doing the work. Because I realized that I was very interested in mental health as a concept, and it was like I was looking at it as if it wasn't a problem that I lived with, but actually it was impacting my life in such a negative way that eventually when I accepted it and accepted that I had a problem, it then meant my mental health journey could actually improve. And things have improved in the past 6 years because of that very decision to make some positive steps forward. So what does mental health mean to me? It means living a life, adapting my life, I'd say, adapting my life to whatever's going on for me at that moment, and making sure that I have the tools that I need to survive. And that takes lots of different forms in every day. So when it comes to things that work very well for me, like I mentioned, I love self-help books and I love doing a lot of work on myself. Sometimes that can be a problem because, as you can see behind me, there are lots of books and you can't do it all. But there are so many times where actually reading about other people's mental health journeys has really saved my own mental health from getting worse, because it's given me perspective, but also given me tools to manage. So I think my biggest tool that I've possibly got, and biggest thing that I say to anyone else, is just go and gather stories from other people, listen and learn, because those two things, listening and learning, are fundamental and can actually really improve your own mental health. And the biggest thing for me was connection. Finding community has made a big difference, and no longer lying about dealing with depression, or no longer lying about having anxiety, or having an eating disorder or anything like that. Once you remove that shame, it becomes a lot less heavy to carry. And I think that's the thing that I learned about shame throughout my life. Shame for me is the stigma that other people put onto me. So if you can imagine that all of you have a backpack, and stigma is when everyone puts a stone into your backpack and starts telling you who you are is a problem, or how you think is a problem, or what you do is a problem. So for me, that took the form of my body was wrong. People were telling me ever since I was born that I wasn't male enough, I wasn't a female, and I just didn't know where I fit in. So all of those little things kept adding more stones and stones into my backpack. And until I started to realize that actually I'm carrying around everyone else's stigma, and that's what's causing my shame, that's when things started to suddenly realize for me that I could actually make a difference by removing those stones, by talking. So the more I share my story and the more I talk to other people, the less weight I'm carrying. So that's what shame and stigma meant for me. It was other people's problems with who I am, which contributed to a lot of weight that I was carrying, when it wasn't necessarily something that was natural. I wasn't born in a body that was wrong. I was told my body was wrong. The way I think isn't a problem, but I was told it's a problem. It's just a difference. And we need to familiarize ourselves with differences. And that's all of the difficult things in life. And it's really hard to do. But the easiest way to do it is by listening and learning.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking the time to educate and inform some of us around what it means to be intersex. I really noted when you said suffering versus living with. I think that's a really, really important distinction. And there's such a negative idea around suffering, whereas, if we normalize disrupted mental health, then it no longer becomes suffering, but rather something that we have to navigate through, and the way that we have to sort of adapt to it. Because I think the moment we hear suffering, we want to push that away or eliminate it completely, rather than going through it and holding on to it.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the biggest things was when I first learned about depression and thought, okay, that applies to me. This idea of suffering did make me want to cure it. And it did make me want to, I'm on antidepressants now, and I've been on them for years. But actually, I think it's really important to understand that depression and various other mental health conditions and situations aren't always biological. They can have biological elements to them. But when we talk about mental health and we talk about it in the terms of, oh, I'm suffering from depression, it really paints such a medicalized view on every single aspect and every single decision you make. And that can change the way you interact with and how interact with your diagnosis if you have one. And if you don't have a diagnosis, you end up feeling bad that you don't have a diagnosis. So it becomes a catch-22 in a way. And I think for me, it was really important to realize that I'm not always suffering from depression, even if I always have it. So there are moments where I probably am suffering more than others, and suicide is a part of my story. And I have dealt with suicidal ideation a lot in my life. And I have had attempts where I have made decisions to end my life. But I guess for me, the idea of living with a condition or living with a variation of your mental health is the important part. You need to learn how to deal with it and learn through strategies of coping, so that you can just move forward, because if you otherwise you end up repeating the same pattern over and over again of depression and all of the things that happen to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that and your perspectives. I will now move to Maylis to answer a similar question. So we'd love to hear about what mental health means to you and your journey around it. And then if you could bring any concepts of shame and stigma and how they have affected your mental health and either, contributed to it, or some strategies that you've used to overcome shame and stigma, or like Anick said, what does that mean for you? I really like the backpack analogy that you used, and that it's really other people's shame that they're putting on you. And actually, that's a really good reminder to always check in with ourselves in terms of what we're putting on others. So Maylis, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Anick, for sharing all of that. I think this is what's so great about these sessions. There's so much alignment. And I think for me, similarly to Anick, mental health really means presence, really being present with what's kind of alive for me and my thoughts and my body. And that journey is evolving. There was a point in time, obviously, where I had no idea what mental health was. That's just, based on my environment and the conversations that we had in our home. I was raised in a very, I'd say modern African family, but still that conversation was not, prevalent. And to this point today, where I consider myself a well-resourced person. But even with that, there's the plot twist now where becoming a parent recently means that the tools I knew to work before don't necessarily apply. So really seeing mental health as something that evolves with us as we introspect, as we learn more about ourselves, our needs change. And, you talked about the role of shame and stigma. And for me, there's that piece of mental health, but there's also the story of addiction. And mine is twofold. I'm talking about sex addiction as someone who identifies as, a woman. Well, I grew up with the stigma of female promiscuity. And that was just even before society. I mean, I had my family to thank for imprinting all of the behaviors that were really deemed sinful. I had aunties that were kind of like pointed out, oh my God, she's this and she's that. Look at how she's, showing up and treating her body. And I never understood why. I mean, people just lacked so much compassion. But looking back for me, when, I tried to understand my journey of sex addiction, well, actually, it was a really unhealthy way to explore my sexuality. It's an extreme, really, because it's a process addiction, which means abstinence isn't an ideal solution. It's like, an eating disorder. You're not going to stop eating. You have to find, a joining point and a different relationship to this behavior. But for me, when I came out to myself at 6 years old, I was already aware of the barriers that stood in front of me. There was religion, there was heteronormativity, there was the fact that I was in a very patriarchal kind of society as well. And I eventually moved to the UK, where that meant, well, and now I was Black and I didn't really have any ideas of really female empowerment of women, exploring sexuality, or just people having that conversation so openly. School was out of the picture as well, to try to understand, what that meant. And so, for me, eventually through the work I did, I realized that from, the lens of, childhood trauma, there was already a disconnection with my body. There was a disconnection with the affection I received. So I didn't really know how to be with myself. And so taking on that kind of behavior meant that there was a secrecy, of, okay, wow, this is something that, I don't quite understand. I know there's pleasure from it, but there's also a very downward spiral that comes with it. But in the process, that secrecy feeds a compulsion. And then there's that fear of being found out that also feeds the compulsion. But then there's also loneliness, which is real, that feeds the compulsion. And so it was quite an interesting thing to navigate eventually, because I got to discover myself, my body, what I wanted in the end, through this very challenging experience. But then when that's coupled with substance addiction, I came eventually in time to realize that my anxiety and depression were undiagnosed for many years. And so, meeting again at that point of childhood trauma, there was this kind of avoidant attachment style, really highly critical person, self-critical, all in like the self-rejection. And so my thoughts were a mess. I didn't know how to articulate them, although, I felt like they were very clear in my mind. I knew how they made me feel, but I didn't feel safe to share them. And so when I can introduce substances that would calm me down, that would put me in a state where I felt like I could function, I became addicted to those because it felt good. It felt good and it solved a problem. And so I think for me, it was really important to understand what the addiction came to supplement, what it was solving, so that I can actually analyze that and find, different ways through to exploring this problem. And, when you talk about strategies, well, it's so fascinating because as someone who, is African, but I'm Black also, there's that lens of, coping with things like racialized trauma by just working while Black. This is an experience that you explore years on. I had to let go of so many things and find strengths. But for me, it was about awareness, first of all, that there was an issue, there was a problem. I used to believe in an abstinent model at some point, and then this is just me speaking from my experience. I'm not prescribing anything for anyone. I abstained from sex for 2 years. I actually was sober for many, many years. And eventually I realized that I didn't want to live in fear of relapse. And that was, an idea. There's an ideology that's quite prevalent around that. And for me, I started to think, but what would choice look like? If I future pace in instances where I feel really anxious and really bogged down and I feel like I could use a pick me up, if I future pace and I start to see, but what would life look like in an hour, in 10, hours in a day? Do I really want to be in that situation? Now I start to have agency over my behavior and I could choose differently. And then same as Anick, community and spaces where I could relate to people were open about these things is so powerful. And also crucial for me was therapy. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have a therapist. And it took many different approaches to start understanding the root cause of my addiction. And today I need less intensive forms of therapy because I have enough tools, but it's about exploring other things that are more related to sustaining mental health, to growth, and where I want to be in my life, really. You're on mute, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Maylis. And so far, listening to you and Anick, there's this pattern or this theme that's coming up of this as a journey, and a journey that ebbs and flows and changes and will likely continue to do so, for the rest of your lives. I appreciated your a description of mental health as being in your body and being, those feelings of disconnection from your body. I know a lot of folks will, they have this really sort of strong, resilient, stubborn brain that can, fight through anything. But when they really start to notice things in their body and how things are affecting them in terms of their nervous system is really, when they say, okay, I'm going to have to turn my stubborn brain off and listen to my body. So I appreciated that you mentioned that. And I also think that your story highlights just the complexities of this. I mean, challenge after challenge. And I thank you for sharing all of that with us and being really transparent about that. So Suresh, I'll move over to you. So again, if you could please describe a little bit about what mental health means to you and what your journey has been like, including experiences of shame and stigma, and maybe some strategies that you found helpful or not.
First and foremost, what's mental health? Anybody in India, you go and ask them, they would say that's for people who've probably gone crazy, who've lost their mind. It still is. You know, in India, it is looked down upon, and it is not something really spoken of. Or at least I would say the last 3-4 years, the conversation on mental health and with the pandemic, it's kind of really, brought to the forefront. But prior to this, it was all subdued. Everything, when you're growing up, don't show emotions. As a boy, as a woman, yeah, as a girl, go ahead, show it off. But as a boy, you're supposed to not cry. You're supposed to suppress all your feelings, be a man and, go out there, prove, like what you said, Erica, that stubbornness, that they kind of, make you be a little more strong in every possible way. And for me, as a young boy, I was not fitting into any of that. I used to enjoy not doing some serious stuff like how the other boys do, playing all those rough games. And I was like, okay, I like playing games, but not that rough where I'm going to beat somebody else up or nut somebody else. So I hated group sports. I enjoyed solo sports, but they said, oh, why do you want to go out and play all those sports? That's not for guys. And I was like, okay, it's not easy. But I continued, and through another layer is my skin color. I know in India, coming back, as a brown skinned boy, it was not easy for me then and there as well. But I never kind of knew why. I was still figuring out. And like Anick mentioned, I think in the very young days, I think I just wanted to go ahead and kill myself. And I did try that a couple of times. For whatever reasons, I think that stubborn me or something inside me said, no, don't do it. And somehow I said, I'm going to fight it. Right? That fighting spirit came into me. And for whatever reasons, I think, I started fighting everything. I said, no, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to fight this out. I'm going to do everything possible so that nothing can affect me. But as days progressed, years, all of that, be that work, when I kind of figured myself out that I was not, the normal, like as society really puts that out there in India, I was very much attracted to boys, and I really didn't know why this was happening. But I again suppressed myself. I was closeted for the longest possible, for close to 33 years, 32 years, right? But I came out to myself and I was figuring myself out, but I suppressed majority. So I had 2 lives, right? So it was not easy. And the emotion, the heaviness, all of that was quite a bit. But then I still said, no, you know what? I'm going to fight it on, because that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to, set myself off. I'm not going to be weak in front of people. Knowing that I'm gay, I don't want to be considered somebody who's a failure. So I put all those aside, emotions, really not allowing them to go through, just suppressing them, pushing them in different corners. I don't know where, but somehow, as I came out, I thought, you know what, the community is going to be very welcoming. I'm going to be accepted. It was a far more difficult process. Again, skin color came into picture. I was discriminated a lot more there, and that kind of pushed me further down, right? Suppressing my feelings, emotions, it was getting too heavy. And I didn't know how to go about with that because everybody's expectations was something different, and I was not fitting into the criteria of being fit. And I was working, I was trying, but not getting there. All of those things. And in between, I started losing my hair and I was getting bald, and that also kind of added on to it. Like I was like, how much more do I fight? And somewhere down the line, I said I wanted to get rid of all of this, but I can't kill myself, but I'm going to go ahead and do something. I didn't know what that was. And that's when substance came in front of me. And I just took it. And I think now when I look back, I felt the most calm at that point in time when I was in substance. I was like, I didn't give a damn about what the world really had to say. Though outside, when I was not using substance, I was still saying, yes, I don't give a damn to the world. I'm still going to fight. But when I was on substance, I was like, I need to feel calm. I was feeling that. And, that kind of got along. I kind of went into a little bit of a dark hole out there, not too much. But then somewhere down the line, I realized the fact that what am I really doing? Why should I carry somebody else's burden? Like, how Maylis and Anick y'all mentioned, the shame putting me down. I need to address those things. I need to bring them to the forefront and, head on tackle it. How can I do that? I'm just running away from problems. So can I start addressing them? Can I take one step at a time and address them and start doing things for myself first? Because somewhere down the line, I knew that I cannot do anything else. Like I cannot take my life again, but I also want to be successful and I want to do the right thing out there. And in my workplace, I was progressing as well. Good. So somewhere down the line, it kind of just dawned upon me that, you need to find another way to accept yourself, accept all who you are, be it your good, bad, ugly, accept it, own it, and be out there. And don't bother much about what people are going to say, because they're going to say that any which ways. So rather you put that aside, focus on yourself, and start doing things that can really go forward. So I think one of my coping mechanisms, though, because like I said, I was a little bit into sports, and that is solo sports. So I kind of tried to get back into that, feel good about myself. And that kind of started taking a different turn altogether. I was, feeling better, and I stood, a lot of times I know this has worked for me. I stand in front of the mirror, no clothes, stark naked, saying that, Suresh, you're beautiful, you're amazing. Yes, whatever you've gone through, you have gone through because there is a reason for it, and you can find a way out. It is going to be one baby step at a time, but you need to take that baby step now. So that was my self-talk, because I couldn't share this with anybody. There was so much of stigma attached to even, the word drugs itself. And everybody's like, oh my God, who are you in India, right? So at that time, now it's a chaotic. So, so for me, I think the self-talk was there. And I was very, very, very fortunate to have a good friend who knew me, who understood me, did not judge me, but he's like, you know what? I want to be there for you. I really want to be there for you. And whatever you're doing, as an adult, whatever you're going through, and just let me know if you need any help. I think that one support kind of made me feel like, okay, I don't need to be really so stressed about a lot of things. There's this one person. So I think that was some of my baby steps that I really took forward. And my work as a facilitator, so talking to people, like Anick said, sharing your story kind of feels a little less burdened. And I've slowly started doing that after all these years, because there is some, somewhere deep in, I do still have that shame, but I'm trying to, it's a journey, right? So I think the more I talk about it, the more I feel like, you don't need to be ashamed about it. It is okay. Everybody goes through a process. Everybody goes through a journey. Probably yours went way off. That's okay. And for today, the person that I am is because of everything that has happened in the past, and I'm owning it. If anybody asked, do you want to change your past? I'd be like, no, god damn it, I love what it is. So it is not easy. Again, I still struggle with few things. I still go through some of that shame, some of the stigma that is around, but I try as much as possible to negate. And I think one of the most important things that I realized after all this process is, can I put myself, out there for somebody else who is a little less privileged, who does not have the power, who does not have that position to probably be where I am today. So when I put myself out there for somebody else, I feel so much at peace right now. So that's where I think, my journey has really begun, where I want to talk about it. I want to talk about substance abuse. I want to talk about, many more things, so that somewhere, somebody out there who's going through this can relate and say, okay, somebody's gone through this and I can get through this. Because I didn't find anybody like that, to be honest. So can I put myself for the use of others? And I feel so much at peace, and it takes a lot of stress away from me. So I feel nice about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Suresh, for sharing. And we create space, and these webinars are such great opportunities to hear folks who have found those supports and then are willing to offer that support back into the world. And it's so crucial to have support. I really appreciated that you found support in yourself and at home in yourself. I personally know the feeling of finding that, and from that place, you then have so much to offer to others. But about finding home and safety and acceptance within self is so incredibly important. And sharing stories, and Anick and Maylis and Suresh, you've all shared stories that while we have an hour together, I'm sure will resonate and be held through the participants for many weeks and months to come. So thank you for sharing your personal stories with all of us. The next thing I wanted to touch on was sort of around using these journeys and these experiences, like you said. So it's a good segue here to support others. And when I was listening to the three of you speak, I started to think, we live in this world where things like discrimination and shame and phobias around gender identities and sexuality and sexual lifestyle preferences exist. And then I heard that, we live in a world where to get through these pains and to feel calm and to feel important, we feel like we're pushed to engage in things like suicide and self-harm and substance use and misuse. And what a shame that is, that we can't, live our lives and that we're pushed into these places. And so, it is that experience, I think, that is so complex, that is so intertwined. And Maylis, you really touched on that. I think the other thing that came up was that achieving and maintaining good mental health isn't a one-person journey. So certainly it is first at home within our bodies and our minds, but then it has to show up in spaces that we exist in. It has to show up at work and with friends, as you said, and with family at school. And so part of the goal of this session as well is to think about, how do we create these inclusive cultures and spaces for these big, courageous conversations that we're having and that we've had so far today. So I'll go back to Anick, and if you could talk a little bit about how you've experienced bringing these topics into spaces you navigate, whether that's work or family, and and how folks in those spaces can support each other's mental health when these conversations do open up, because it's one thing to open up and then it's another to sort of not to know what to do with that. So Anick, over to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of time where we open up conversations and then don't know what to do with it. But I think for me, it becomes a really important thing where you know what your power is and what you can do. Because unless it's your job to, you're not there to fix everyone else's lives. All you can do is try and fix your own or live the easiest life you can. And then other people will see that, and then they will then start to hopefully emulate that for themselves. They will see that you are doing something to work on yourself, and that can only be a good thing. And I think for me, mental health, if I could boil it down to one thing, it's all about control. And I had such a lack of control over things that happened to me, which is probably what led to my various addictions. And I think the active decision to decide to take my own life, or to decide to take a particular drug, or to decide to have a particular kind of relationship, all of that kind of control was us trying to take back power. And I think it's really useful for other people to really understand that our stories aren't comparable to each other. You need to really understand that it's not your place to then share your story for the inspiration of other people. What you will do is share your story, and other people will be empowered themselves to then start to realize that, okay, there's this part of my life that I want to start to take a bit more control over. And when I've tried to do that, when I first started talking about my story as an activist, I was called an activist long before I identified as one, and it made me uncomfortable. When I started talking about my mental health, people would call me brave, and I hated it. It was really uncomfortable for me. But as time went on, I realized actually I wasn't doing it for altruistic purposes. I wasn't sharing my story so that everyone else can suddenly feel better about themselves. I was doing it for the younger me and for the future me. It was very much a me thing. And that's not the case for everyone. There are some people out there who are doing it for everyone else. But the first part of my story was I needed to be who I wanted to see when I was growing up, but I also needed to build that life that I could live in the future. And having these conversations at work, in the UK, we have a wonderful charity called Mental Health First Aid England. And there are various other kind of groups that do similar things. Having space to bring those conversations into work is really useful, but it's about knowing what the impact will then be later on, because I never found a good therapist, still haven't. So I had to do a lot of the work myself to try and do self-therapy and things like that. So I guess a lot of the reasons why I would go and talk about my story at work, wherever I was working at the time, was kind of a cry for help in some spaces. It was trying to get or build a community, maybe not a cry for help, but a call to action. I wanted people to come together and realize that the only way we can break down stigma is by actually just owning it, like Suresh said, like taking ownership over all of the different things that we've been through. And that's a really difficult thing to do if you're living in a world, which we all are, where people are saying, don't talk about this because you'll become defined by it. Now, all of us are on this panel today talking about our mental health, but this is just an element of our lives. This isn't all we do. We do plenty of other things in our lives. And I think one of the fears people have around disclosing or sharing is that it should be something that's private. And I don't think that's the case. I think the more we talk about all of the things which other people tell us we need to keep private, the less we're all going to struggle with it. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you, Anick. Thank you for sharing that. So Maylis, I will bounce that question over to you. And in the spaces that you navigate, whether that's work or school or family, how how do you bring these topics into spaces that you navigate? And I guess within this question, I think is also built in, you know, how can we create space for conversations like this? Over to you.
Thank you. And I'll definitely try to be brief so I can hand over to Suresh to kind of close. But I think for me, I'll just focus on the point of family, because Anick talked about the workplace. But I think there's just a key consideration when creating space for these stories. I think we have to be mindful that it requires vulnerability. And again, for me, bringing up, you know, the stuff that comes up for you inherently brings up stuff for people. And if you think about parents, family members, loved ones, when we're changing, the reflection of, you know, our experience actually reflected back on them, and they start to see maybe their failures, maybe the areas where they too may have had an involvement, and that brings up stories of guilt and shame for them. And I think I had to really process what it would mean to seek that level of acceptance, because it was important for me to be open with my story, but I had to understand actually who deserved that vulnerability. I love my parents, but again, they're not able to allow me a level of safety for me to be fully open. I came to this country a year ago and thought I'd share everything with everybody, but then I realized that I have resources, my mother doesn't. And so can I truthfully say that, you know, for the benefit of me seeking some form of connection, opening up in such a way doesn't leave her in a vulnerable space? I had to sit with that and realize that there needs to be a choice. And for me, I chose safety. And I felt that safety was better provided in my own support network, in my partner, in my colleagues, in, you know, my other chosen family, because they could handle that. And I think it's really important. We try to make conversations available to everyone, but we have to understand, as Anick said, what implications come up for ourselves, but also for those who are engaging in those.
That's such an important point. And someone once said to me, you know, the minute you put it out into the world, it's no longer yours. And you have to realize that, you know, folks can do what they will do with that information, and hopefully for the best. But really, it's about some self-preservation as well. And yeah, the minute you let that out, it's out there. So Suresh, in your spaces that you navigate, it's really interesting because, like you said, you are in a physical location on this planet where some of these issues and most of these issues really don't come up, and there's not a lot of space for that. So please, we'd love to hear your perspective.
For me, I think all I can say is that I have some good allies who really understand me, who are there as rock solid, be it my partner, be it my friends, who give me the strength to go about talking about this. It's not easy. And especially at workplace, I do have few allies who understand and know me completely. And I'm willing to be out there, because somewhere down the line in India, it is like, you know, crying babies get milk, quiet ones don't. You know, so the more you cry, the more you get the attention. And then I'm using my position, I'm using my privilege, and I'm using my power to bring that conversation onto the table. I don't want to be under wraps. I don't want to be under closed doors. Let's have an open conversation. And I'm not scared. So I have conversations with leaders and saying that, you know, what is happening? We need to have these conversations. Yes, they're going to be uncomfortable, but then that's what it is. And I think you know, in a ways, I think the pandemic has also really opened that conversation of mental health, taking care of everybody, what issues there are. So for me now, navigating that conversation has become a little bit more easier, because they are able to understand and relate to the different forms of sufferings that people go through. Be it loneliness, some have gone through that, be it even with addiction and various other forms, you know. So I think slowly and steadily, me putting myself out there, sharing my story, has brought some sort of light. And, you know, because I have a good support system, again, having said that, I do go for therapy. I do have conversations with therapists on a regular basis, so that I feel comfortable to take this extra, so, you know, conversation that I need to have, because the more I put it out there, yes, it's all out there. Parents don't know about it. Should I be scared? Should I not be scared? But then I say I'm okay with it. I will deal with that later, but this conversation needs to go because there is a larger chunk of, people who really need support. And we do lack mental health facilities in India, very less mental health professionals, and who understand the community more. Right. So I don't mind putting myself out there. Like what Anick said, yes, I'm looking out for myself. But for me, I think the more I put myself out there, I feel at peace. So I think that's how I'm navigating these conversations in my places.
Thank you, Suresh, for that perspective. And I think it is really a decision that you make based on how safe you feel, and it's so it's interesting to note that that is part of your healing, is to be able to share that with folks, and that's really important to acknowledge. I appreciate all of your perspectives, Anick, Maylis, and Suresh. We are at 3 minutes past the hour, but if everyone is okay with it, we might just go a few minutes over to try to answer some of the questions that are in the chat, if that's okay with everybody. So there's the first question that popped up is sort of similar to what we were just discussing, but it gets a little bit more sort of granular. And the participant asks how you navigate spaces and workplaces that don't prioritize you or show up for you as a person in the LGBTQIA+ community. And so I guess sort of what is the advice that you would give to someone whose workplace has no immediate supports, and there's no option for them to leave their workplace? So what I think I'll do is I'll just open it up to the three panelists, and whoever wants to jump in to answer can do that.
Well, I can go because I kind of relate to this. We really didn't have anything. In my previous organization, I was the only out person, but there were so many closeted people that I knew, but as openly talking about that, it was not easy. Like I said, I put myself out there for other people, though I was struggling with myself. But I think finding that calmness and wanting to bring that change, because I was so exhausted with the dual life that I was living in. I wanted to kind of, change that whole narrative out there. So it is not easy. You need to find somebody out there. There's going to be one ally, right, who's going to be super supportive. You just need to find that person. And if you can find that person, somebody in the higher ups who has that position to bring that change, talk to that person, build a relationship, and then take the conversation forward. Again, in the meantime, while you are finding people out there on the top, start building your own set of friends, or in the form of colleagues out there who really understand you, right? Even if they don't understand the whole narrative completely, but they are there supporting you because they know that you're being authentic to them. You're saying things which mean authentic, right? So with that, I think it's one step, one day at a time. And it doesn't happen over a few months or years or a year. It takes a couple more years. So it took me 5 years to really bring a lot of change. And it is persistent and consistent, work that needs to go through while taking care of your own mental health.
Yeah, great points. Anick or Maylis, do you have anything else to add to that question? No? Okay, fantastic. And so the next question I have is directed at to Maylis, but of course, Anick and Suresh, feel free to jump in. I'm just going to read a little bit what the person wrote, because it's a bit of sharing as well, which I think is important. Hi, Maylis, I am a queer male born, and as many gays, we have an intricate community which is very sexually focused. For example, sex, dating apps, and objectifying bodies, and this assumption that the more sex we have, the better, which is often missing real connection and emotional availability. And the person asks, they say that they are constantly looking in their sex addiction for validation and ways to relate to their community through that. And so what would be your sort of first steps or advice to overcome a sex addiction where it is attached to community and the social construct or idea of what it means to be gay?
Thank you. That's such a big question. And whoever shared that, I just want to thank you, because in my own journey as a woman identifying as bisexual, I struggled to find a community where I could talk about this. And so the community where I found solace was amongst gay men, quite often those who were talking about chemsex addiction, those who were talking about, sex addiction and many other things. But it was about, that relationship to the body and how hypersexualization plays a major part in the way we perceive intimacy. And for me, it's an interesting correlation for Black bodies, Black female bodies, but Black male bodies. If you think about the conversation of porn, we're not going to even go into that, but there's a lot of research and a lot of information to be found there as to how the messaging that we're seeing impacts how we feel we need to show up and how we feel we should connect, and the instant gratification, the lack of presence, the fact that it's so complicated to just be and to ask for what we need because we're fearing that we might be judged. And because of this, instant dating app culture, we might be passed on for the next person and people might get bored with us. And so we give what we feel we should give, and we don't always check in with ourselves to know whether people deserve to, receive that part of our intimacy. And for me, if there's a first step in my process of abstinence, and again, I'm saying it's not for everybody, I needed to create distance and understand in that void, what was that urge? What did I feel I couldn't live without? Or what was that giving piece that I couldn't stop? What was really fueling that? And I realized that it was just a lack of self-worth and a lack of training to say what I needed and what my desires really were. And so it took years of learning to articulate that. Sorry about the little baby crying. That's my child being super shady. One day I might have to have this discussion with them anyway, so it's going to get quite exciting. But it was about learning new language and learning to frame my needs and to start at the baby step level of what intimacy looked like. And from there on, I could build on that to physical intimacy and to more complex styles of relationship and even exploring commitment. So I'd say go with your pace, and it takes time. So don't beat yourself up if you're not there yet. I think many, many, many people are going through it, and we haven't even started to begin as a society to acknowledge the impact it's having on our community.
Thank you so much for that answer. And so we are 10 minutes over the time. This is such a fantastic conversation. And I feel like we could talk, for hours and hours and hours. There are a few more chats that we won't be able to, questions in the chat that we won't be able to answer today. But I know Michael will come back on to give a sort of closing remark, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how those folks can reach out and build community. One quick sort of punt back to the panelists for the closing of the panel. Somebody did ask sort of quick tricks that they can have to adopt to overcome negative thoughts. So building on that, I guess if you could, each of you just say one or two words or reminders that you have and you hold for yourself. I know I'm putting you on the spot here. When things are rough, or actually maybe even when things are good, something positive that you could quickly share with all of us before we close the panel.
So I know I'm really quick, but I'll go first. So I think my favorite technique that I've learned is I've got a random Instagram account which I've curated just filled with like things that I love, which are things related to mental health or animals or just like lots of fun things. So whenever I'm having a particular dark thought, I'll log on to that account and then just get an influx of joy because you're the one who curates that.
Amazing. I picture an Instagram account of teddy bears and kittens. Maylis?
I think for me, there's two things. One, I like to lay down on the floor and just do nothing. I like to feel cold coming from, on my back and just do nothing in silence. And another one, a bit like Anick, but I curated this folder on my phone, which is my moments of where I drew impact or courage, and where, it's any feedback from the work that I do that I receive. I try to put that in there to just remind myself that no matter how crazy things are, I have, some good about me and some good in me. It's just a matter of finding my way back to that.
Suresh.
And for me, all I would say is this one.
Oh.
I just get better. That's it. I mean, for me, she is my, place where I know no matter what happens, the world goes upside down. I know that I need to be there for her, and she gives me complete joy. That's one. The other thing, if I really need to get my frustration out, I do have a punching bag. I put faces up there at times and just go punch for 5 minutes, and I feel so good. And yeah, that's my way of getting it out and feeling that, you know what, virtually I'm, punching you out there. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. It was an absolute honor to host and moderate this and hear your stories. And I thank the three of you, Anick, Maylis, and Suresh, for sharing with all of us. Really a pleasure to listen to your stories and hear your truths, and also have some really hopeful strategies that we can use and hopefully bring to our work. So I will hand back over to Michael now to close off the session.
Oh yeah, I just want to echo that. Thank you so much, Anick, Suresh, and Maylis, and thank you, Erica. You did a fantastic job. You're all incredible. Perhaps I'll ask each of you just to drop your contact details in the chat if anyone would like to reach out to you with a specific question. If we didn't get to it today, perhaps that's the best way. So for those who are in London, we're actually hosting an in-person panel on the 25th of May at Lock Hotel, Bermondsey, and that's on the topic of queer resilience, and that's in partnership with Voda, the new LGBTQ mental health app. Queer Perspectives, so this series and our Queer Leadership 101 series will be back after the summer, but please do get in touch if we can support you or your business in the meantime. So take care for now, and see you all soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.